Welcome, everyone. I am Patty Martell, supervisor and producer at CNBC and the co-host of Women in Wealth. We want to empower women to be better investors and to make informed financial decisions. Today's guest is Erin Lowry. She is the author of the four-part Millennial series, which includes Broke Millennial, Broke Millennial Takes on Investing, and the Broke Millennial Talks Money. Erin, welcome so much. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So I guess my question for you is, you don't have a finance background, you don't have an investing background. Why did you start writing about investing?
Well, investing was later. I started really mostly because I found money interesting. And more importantly, other people seemed super uncomfortable with that. And, I studied journalism in school, and I've always been really drawn to talking about topics that other people find perhaps a little uncomfortable to some degree. And I grew up in a family where we did talk about money a lot, and it was almost just sort of a neutral. Like, it didn't have a lot of emotion or power to it. There was just matter of fact, something that you need to know and do in life is handle your money. And I really started to recognize when I moved to New York City after college, and I was working 3 jobs and just trying to make things work, I still felt very in control, even though I was quite the broke millennial at the time. And so many of my other friends, even people who were receiving what I would consider generous parental welfare support, seemed so overwhelmed. And that was really interesting to me. And that truly was the inspiration to write Broke Millennial. It started back in 2013 as a blog. And really, I wanted to not only hold myself accountable to learn more, which is really where the investing part does start to come in, but in addition to share stories about how I learned about money, how my parents had taught me about money. And it just was sort of a creative hobby that ended up taking traction and then becoming my whole career.
So it's really your foundation. Your foundation comes from having these conversations as a child with your parents, right? It's these values that they instilled in you, and how you kind of started, or how you were aware, I should say, of being better with your money.
Absolutely. And there were just so many moments where my parents did what I would consider a really excellent job is showing by actual life experience as opposed to just telling me what was right and wrong about how to handle money. So big thing for me growing up was paying for 50%. If we were in a Target or a toy store or what have you, and I saw something that I wanted and I asked for it, the question would always either become, well, do you want to pay for 50%? Or you would have to pay for all of it. And that, when you're 7, 8, 9 years old, you're really starting to learn about impulse control and like how to spend your money and value-based purchasing in a very interesting way. And it also really inspired me and my younger sister to be little entrepreneurs, whether it was lemonade stands or when I was older and it was age appropriate babysitting or pet sitting and figuring out how to make my own money. Because if I wanted something, I had to figure out how to have the money to go buy it. And that ultimately also ended up tying into paying for college as well and picking the university that gave me a lot of academic scholarship money so that I could be in a position to graduate without debt. And did I go to my dream school? Maybe not, but I knew that putting myself in that position would enable me to live my dream life. And at 18, there's no way I would have been making that decision if my parents had not really instilled this notion of thinking through your purchases, understanding what money meant, and also understanding the magnitude of taking on a significant amount of student loan debt as well.
And that's really important because, these are big topics. These are, you talk about taking out student loans. That's something that, you do at a very young age, but will stay with you for years and decades sometimes, right? Depending on the amount of money that you borrow. So these are really have long-term impact. And I think that's interesting that your parents would have these conversations with you and your sister at a very young age, because those are important life decisions.
They're huge. And to also be able to think through strategically this notion of, well, I know I want to study 2 different career paths that notoriously do not pay a ton of money. So if I want to do that, then I need to be putting myself in the strongest position to be able to take risks and take a lower paying job and not have to fixate on just finding the best paying job possible because I now have to pay off all of these student loans. Now, don't get me wrong, I married someone with a significant amount of student loan debt. So I am a millennial and, of course, have dealt with paying off student loans.
Well, and also the millennial generation is at a really interesting time in their life right now. They're at a point where you have these large life events happening, right? And so you are into your career now, hopefully well on your way to contributing to your retirement, maybe investing, but also, getting married, or, considering whether you should get a prenup, and, having children. I mean, these all also involve big investments, big commitments, for the long term. So I think it's a really interesting time for this generation. And like we were talking earlier, some of the older millennials are in their early 40s, right? They're not young anymore.
I mean, even those of us smack dab in the middle, I'm turning 34 this year. You ask the TikTok generation, and I certainly am not young either by their standards. So, it has been so interesting also as we've aged that there still seems to be a fair amount of rhetoric around us. I think we've moved out of our parents' basements until the pandemic, and then a lot of us had to go back. So that was a whole conversation. But there does seem to still be a lot of misunderstood feelings about where we are in our life, and the fact that just because we are not achieving milestones, traditional milestones, on the same exact timeline as previous generations, there's nothing wrong with that. Like, wouldn't you also rather people put themselves into certain levels of financial stability before making massive financial decisions, especially getting married and having children? I always big fan of the prenup, preach about prenups all the time. And a big part of that is, one, I look at it as an insurance policy on your marriage. And these are conversations you should be having going into a marriage, that if something went wrong, how would we divide our assets? What feels fair to us in the ecosystem of our relationship? And also, because you have a prenup, it's the default laws of your state. So if you don't agree with those, get your own. And then on the other part of that is, marriage is one of the biggest financial commitments you are going to make. So not your wedding, which also can put
Mhm.
people into debt, but your actual marriage. You are legally tying yourself to another person, and by and large to their financial decisions and financial situation. So it's incredibly important that we not only have some level of financial stability prior, but can create that together as a unit as well.
But I mean, these are difficult conversations. Like, it's not easy. People are not comfortable talking about money and saving and investing. Like, how did you initiate that conversation with your now husband?
Well, this is definitely a moment where I'm like, don't do what I did. I did it wrong. So let me help you figure out how to do it right. And I do talk about this extensively in Broke Millennial Talks Money. What I just kind of offhandedly brought up the point that, I would like a prenup. Like, it wasn't so much a open dialogue at the point that I did it. But I also did it before we were even engaged. That is what I did correct, is that I was starting to have these conversations well before there was no timeline, there was no pressure. Like, this was a conversation that was being had very, very early. And bringing it up as sort of an offhanded comment was not the right move. But bringing it up and giving context as to why I believe that's important would have been the better move. Or just saying, what do you think about prenups? And that being the opener. And it doesn't also have to be a whole conversation right away. It could be, what do you think about prenups? Hearing what somebody's impression is, maybe misinformation about them, and then engaging in a dialogue about why you think it's important. So for me, a big part of it too is just making sure that we both understood that if something were to happen to our marriage, what felt fair to us in terms of divisions of assets. We were bringing different things in, particularly to me, protecting both of our retirement accounts was really important, and making sure that neither one of us could kind of raid the other person's retirement account, because that tends to be one of the things that in a divorce situation goes first. And also just, I had books that had already come out prior, and I wanted to make sure that anything that I had created prior to the marriage was going to be mine and mine alone. And one of the big things that I said in this conversation to make it clear was that I would never sign a business contract without knowing the terms and conditions of the contract that I was signing. But how many people sign a marriage license without truly understanding the terms and conditions of what they are legally agreeing to? And it's more akin to every time we download an app or register for something and we just scroll down and click accept terms and conditions. That's what a lot of people are doing with a marriage license. It's not dooming anything to fail. If anything, I think if you're in a position to be able to have healthy conversations around finances that goes into the prenup talk, you are setting yourself up for a much stronger relationship in marriage, as opposed to just avoiding all of these tough conversations.
You know that it's really interesting because I saw a stat recently in the last couple of weeks that women are actually, waiting to get married longer. Like they're, I think, women used to get married, in their 20s, and then progressively has gotten older, right? So now, when you think about what the woman is bringing to a marriage, right, it's significantly more. She probably, she has her own career, she has her own investments, and she has her own retirement, right? It's a different conversation than 20 years ago, even. Yeah.
Absolutely. And, a big part of that too is talking about debt. You do need to have frank conversations if you're both bringing in debt, if only one of you is bringing in debt. Legally, you are not obligated necessarily unless you refinance it or co-sign on it. But by and large, if someone's bringing student loans into a marriage, you're not legally responsible for those in a divorce unless you've refinanced. But if you help aggressively pay them off and then you get divorced 2 years later, how are you going to feel about that? So those are also things that you can account for in a prenup. So it is really important to talk through all the different angles and what does feel fair. And again, knock on wood, hopefully your marriage is long and you never have to pull the prenup out. But if it's not, you're going to be really glad it's there. And divorce is expensive. It can
Mhm.
also help reduce the cost of the divorce.
It's not very a romantic topic, but it's real, right? It's a practical, it's a business decision, and unfortunately, half of the marriages in our country fail. So,
It is. And, again, I think that it's so helpful if you're not going to sign one for whatever reason, to at least go through the process of talking about what feels fair, what feels right, how you want to handle your money in your marriage, talking about, what if your partner's family needs financial support? What if your family needs financial support? How would the two of you navigate that? Talking through all of these different scenarios that the prenup conversation usually does bring up, I think can also just be so incredibly helpful for anyone who is, whether it's getting married or whether it's just moving in together and committing to each other for the long term. Such helpful conversations to have. And they don't have to happen all in one go. That's the other big part of this. Like, it can be slow and steady over the course of time.
so because this is Women in Wealth, and we try the goal of the series is to empower and inform women. What would you say to female millennial investors who are want to get started with investing? Like, where do you start? Like, hopefully, you would have started already, right?
Hopefully, but also if you haven't, don't let that be discouraging. I think sometimes, especially if you read, benchmarks or stats about where you're supposed to be by 30, 35, 40, that can feel really demoralizing. So if it's not helpful for you, for some of us, we're like hyper competitive and a benchmark can be aspirational. And for other people, it's super demoralizing. So know yourself before you engage in looking at that information. But the number one place to start is retirement. And again, I feel like we really do people a disservice in the language that we use around retirement because we say save for retirement and you're not. You're investing. And if you are saving for retirement, we need to have a conversation as opposed to investing, because you're going to have to save a whole lot more money to achieve the same goal compared to putting that money to work for you in the stock market. And it's really interesting to me how often I've been giving talks and said something like, who in here is investing? Like a smattering of hands will go up and I'll say, well, who here has a 401k or an IRA or, some version of a retirement plan? And like more than half the room, hands will go up. Okay, great. So you're investing. you're an investor. And talking about that, kind of reframing that for folks, I think can really help feel empowering. Like, okay, yeah, I can do that. I can figure that out. Now, on the flip side, also bringing up, is your money actually invested? So making sure, checking that retirement account, making sure that you've actually selected investments. It's great that a lot of companies have changed where they will just auto enroll folks into a target date fund if they don't select something themselves, but not everyone does that. And there are still people I will get emails and direct messages from, like, oh, thank you for saying that. I checked mine and it's been sitting in a cash settlement account for like 3 years and I didn't realize that. So that is a really, again, coming back to the language that we use. If we say save for retirement, sometimes people will take that literally and not totally recognize that you have to pick investments as part of setting up your plan.
And even sitting out for 3 years or not starting to invest in your retirement or your 401k, every year makes a difference, and that money adds up and it compounds, right? Which is so important. Why you should start early and just keep investing.
Absolutely. And even if it's just a little bit, that's the other big part is sometimes folks will think to themselves like, well, I can't do the advised 10 or 15 or 20% into this account. So I'm just not going to really focus on that right now. When I can do it, I'll get there. Well, the big joke is life tends to get more complicated, not less, right? So even if you're earning a whole lot more in the future, it doesn't mean that you're going to have significantly more disposable income, for one. For two, if you haven't been building the habit and the muscle to actually invest and save, it's really hard to go from 0 to 20% just because you started earning more money. So I do always love to encourage folks to, if you have an employer match, at least invest up to getting the full match. If that's 3%, 5%. And if 5% is too much for you right now, 2%, 1%, just anything to get started. And then every 6 months, push it up by another percent. And that slow and steady drip, you barely feel it in your paycheck and you can really work your way towards your goal, as opposed to going from 0 to 10% that you're going to feel.
And really understanding, or even just, thinking about the fact that inflation is really high, right? We've had high inflation for the last couple of years. And the fact that that is eating away at your money that is sitting in your savings account, right? Which is so important, to be invested in areas where your money is going to grow.
Yes. And if it is in savings, or, you still should have some money in savings, it shouldn't all be in the stock market. For that money that is, please don't have it sitting at 0.01% or 0.03%. Like, shop around for a savings account with a decent interest rate. It's the only silver lining we've really got out of this inflationary period, is that we have seen those, APYs on, our savings account rates go back up. So that's been the only real silver lining.
You said something earlier when we were talking about, the millennial generation being the sandwich generation, right? Like, we're now getting to the point, as far as age, where we are, you have children, right? And now our parents are getting older. So now it's another thing to consider, right? You're talking about aging parents, and taking care of them, and also not only investing for yourself and for your retirement, but also investing for your children. Those are three big buckets to think about.
It is. And again, apologies to Gen X, often referred to as the forgotten generation. You have been the sandwich generation, and here we are coming for your title. I apologize in advance, but we too are aging into this phase. So any words of wisdom, please pass it on down. But the other thing is that one area that I hope we can maybe course correct a little bit, that we saw certain parents, I'm going to say largely boomer parents, do, is raid their own retirement accounts to send their children to college. And that is one area that I really would like to encourage millennials to not do, because what's happening is, on the back end, we, the children, are then having to financially support the aging parents who raided their retirement accounts to support us and send us to college. So it still becomes this cycle that becomes, financially very fraught and difficult. So, the putting on your own oxygen mask first trope, Still very true. You want to focus first on your own financial stability and your own retirement account before really fixating on whether it's the 529 or whatever sort of college savings plan you want to use. If you can do both, great. But also maybe encouraging children to look at going to cheaper, more affordable colleges, maybe looking into encouraging, different versions of making college affordable. And we don't even know where things are going to be in 10 to 18 to 20 years, what the landscape of higher education is going to look like either. So please prioritize yourself whilst also, of course, caring for your children. And then when it comes to parents, again, a big topic in Broke Millennial Talks Money is actual scripts and advice about how to navigate these financial conversations, because it is so much better to know early whether or not your parents are going to need your financial support, because then you can start to plan for it and adjust for it in your own financial plans, as opposed to all of a sudden there's an incident and your parent needs help and you are not prepared for that. Now, not all parents are going to engage, and not all of them are going to engage easily. Again, starting early. But you probably have a pretty good sense to some degree of your parents' financial situation, or whether or not there's a retirement account, or if there is, is it going to be robust and enough? And if you think that it's not, first of all, if you have siblings, please discuss and talk with them if that feels like a safe thing to do. You each might have different pieces of information about your parents' situation. So perhaps together you can create a better overall picture. But the other part is maybe you can get together and start an emergency fund for your parents. Maybe you all can get together and talk about who could handle what in the case of mom and dad needing help as they age. Can anyone take them in? Is anyone going to move in with them? Can somebody provide more financial support than another person? And again, equal isn't always fair. So dividing something, if there's three of you, three ways, that's not necessarily the most fair way to handle things financially, depending on everybody's unique situation. That was a lot all about the parents part.
I mean, this all sounds like very practical advice. And, coming out of a pandemic where, people were just so anxious to go out and to travel. I mean, people have been spending a lot of money. It'll be interesting to see how things correct, right? Or as we go back to that baseline of people, maybe not traveling as much, because that's I think it's just a reaction of being locked up for such a long time, that we do get back to this base of being practical and saving and thinking about the long term, right? Not thinking about, well, where am I going to go this summer? I want to go to Italy for 2 weeks or whatever. And that's a lot of money, right? You really need to think about the long term plan and saving. And the fact that every little bit helps.
It does. And, I was here for revenge spending. I got to be honest. I was someone who had saved up in the pandemic. And as soon as I could travel, I was like, let's go. It is time. But also travel is a high priority for me. So even in non-pandemic times, that is something that we allotted in our overall financial plan. And that part, I think, is what a lot of this comes down to as well, is values-based, right? Like, what do you value? And are you able to prioritize long-term financial goals with shorter term being able to spend on what you value? And life is seasonal. There are going to be phases of life where, whether it's as a byproduct of what you have phased into, how much money you're earning, what your overall financial obligations are, there might be seasons where you can spend a little more. But then you also have to be realistic that if something changes, whether maybe it's caring for an ailing relative, maybe you have a child, it's going to change how you spend in other ways. And I would encourage people, though, to evaluate seasons of life that they're in. And it's not just about spending. Sometimes it's also about quality time with loved ones. And if we're in a phase of life where maybe it's parents are aging and they don't live near you, and maybe you only have a certain amount of time left to get really quality memories and experiences together, that priorities go to spending what would be an international vacation on going a couple of more times that year to visit relatives. And I do think it's important to be critical and self-reflective around where am I in life and how can I maximize this phase of my life, and know that it's going to change and may or may not ever return it quite the same way.
And having that emergency fund, that rainy day fund, is so important. You know, we bought a house in 2018, and things come up all the time. I mean, things that you would just never plan for, right? Like we had a pipe burst one winter, and I mean, we had water everywhere, and it's like, you know, that's why it's important also, you know, when you own, not, I mean, just in general, right, to have that emergency fund, because things happen. And if you are a homeowner, right, it's never ending. The amount of things that you want to change or you want to upgrade, or it's another big purchase and another big life event that you need to be prepared for, and think about the unexpected.
It is. And, you know, on the homeownership topic, I think what, again, coming back to like millennials sort of taking heat from other generations about delaying milestones, you know, part of it too, one, housing shortage and affordability, but also there's nothing wrong with renting. I always get like very upset about this argument that renting is just throwing away your money when it's just exchanging your money for a service that's being provided. And also, again, this depends a little bit on your city and state, but if you are in a tenant favored city or state, you know, we have some water damage in our apartment right now. We didn't do it. The people upstairs are the culprits. I just called the landlord and it's getting sorted. I don't have to spend a penny of my own money. I don't have to handle any of it. You know, anytime something goes wrong in my apartment, call up, hey, this happened. You know, XYZ person needs to come and fix it. Obviously, we aim to avoid those moments because it's still inconvenient for us, but we are not the ones that are out. We don't have to pay the property taxes or the mortgage. And yes, is our rent subsidizing those things? Sure. But also, if we want to move, easy enough to do. Don't have to try to offload a house in order to do it. So there's pros and cons to renting and owning, but renting is not exclusively throwing money away. And there's also other ways to be investing and growing your wealth. It doesn't necessarily have to be with a home. So I do think for, you know, anyone that's listening, especially who lives in a high cost of living area, particularly if that's advantageous for your career and overall you are putting yourself in a position to build wealth by living in that area, no, renting does not have to be seen as just throwing your money away. Now, if home ownership is a goal of yours, that's also a big part of evaluating your financial plan, right? That maybe some indulgences that you normally like to take part in need to take a back seat for a while, because right now, for sure, every little bit counts when it comes to trying to put a down payment on a house, especially with how competitive this market is. And that mortgage rates aren't as great as they were not that long ago.
For sure. Well, Erin, that is a half hour. Thank you so much. And I want to thank everyone for watching today's show. I do want to let you know that our inaugural Women in Wealth event is on April 11th. Guests include Alexandra Carter, Susie Orman, Winnie Sun, Patrice Washington, and more. You can go to cnbc.com/events to sign up. There is no charge. So please check it out. It's coming up April 11th. Erin, thank you so much for your time and all the advice you gave us. We'll see you soon.
Thanks for having me.